Any major media outlet you can think of likely falls under the umbrella of one of these conglomerates. The reality is that we are living in the illusion of choice every time we consume anything, and we do not have a digital media ecosystem that really allows for the existence of true independent journalism. So what's the result of this? We have become an echo chamber of partisan propaganda. But another issue is that the news we receive has the hands of big business all over it. So understandably, they're going to make sure they protect their own interests in the kind of reporting that they allow to happen under their supervision. Adapting to the challenges of an ever-changing world means embracing the reimagination of systems we've grown to accept as absolute reality. One of these systems being the current socioeconomic order that has allowed corporations to monopolize entire industries and wield incredible power over the masses. About 90% of all media in the US is owned by just 5 companies: Comcast, Warner Bros. Discovery, Disney, Paramount Global, and Fox Corporation.
Societies differ, but in ours, the major decisions over what happens in the society, decisions over investment and production and distribution and so on, are in the hands of a relatively concentrated network of major corporations and conglomerates and investment firms and so on. They are also the ones who staff the major executive positions in the government, and they're the ones who own the media, and they're the ones who have to be in a position to make the decisions. They have an overwhelmingly dominant role in the way life happens, what's done in the society.
The consolidation of mass media into the hands of a few facilitates 2 things. 1, helping corporations maintain control over the masses, and 2, maintaining the socio-political status quo by repressing true revolutionary thought. The deeper we progress into the digital age, the more our entire collective consciousness comes under corporate control. The amount of time we spend allocating our attention to digital media is increasing exponentially. And when this digital media is almost entirely owned and operated by big business, what does this mean? It means our attention is entirely owned and operated by big business. They tell us what to think, they tell us who to trust, they tell us what is important and what's not. While so many things are happening all over the globe and even within our own country, they focus on a sliver. They don't want us to actually be aware of major geopolitical events and the history behind them, but they want us to think that we are. I don't think I need to explain why this is problematic. Any conscious person surely already knows. Coupled with this concerning consolidation of mass media is the dramatic decline in information literacy within the population. Information literacy is a skill that comprehensively uses information tools and information sources to solve problems encountered. The CIL test, which stands for Computer and Information Literacy Test, was carried out by the National Center for Education Statistics in 12 countries in 2018, then again in 2023. Compared to 2018, all but 2 countries saw scores drop, with only Luxembourg and Italy seeing an increase in scores. And 4 countries saw scores drop by statistically significant values: Denmark, Finland, Germany, and the US. The US's score dropped the most, from 519 in 2018 to 482 in 2023. As a society, we need to start having a very serious conversation about how we're allocating our attention and about our capacity to think critically about the information presented to us. We especially need to be thinking about the generation we're raising, their desire and ability to think critically and to keep up with socio-cultural competence in an increasingly globalized world. I came across this fortune on my walk the other day that said, "Learn to adapt to the challenges of an ever-changing world." Not only is this a message for me in my personal life, but it's a message for our entire society. We can no longer cling to past ways of thinking and being because our world is ever-changing. Adapting to the challenges of an ever-changing world means embracing the reimagination of systems we've grown to accept as absolute reality. One of these systems being the current socioeconomic order that has allowed corporations to monopolize entire industries and wield incredible power over the masses. The system that has allowed for 90% of all mass media in the US to be owned by just 5 corporations. I don't think I need to tell you what that system is. By the end of this video, my goal is that you'll have a more full understanding of the chokehold that corporate mass media has us in, but that you'll also feel confident about your ability to combat it. But first, if you haven't already, be sure to check out my last video on anti-intellectualism and hit the subscribe button if you enjoy conversations like this. Let's get into it. The concepts of information and media literacy go all the way back to ancient societies like ancient Greece, where philosophers pondered the effects of reading and writing on communication and memory. This was at a time when the majority of their society couldn't read or write, and access to learning these skills was largely exclusive to the wealthier classes. Obviously, as human society progressed, reading and writing, which are central to the concept of literacy, became much more common. With more and more people being able to read and write, came a new understanding of the concept of information. Now, information was something that could be documented and memorized, not solely spread by word of mouth. And where this information is documented would come to be known as media, and it could be produced in mass. The first manifestation of mass media were printed newspapers in the 17th century. As this video puts it, the history of media literacy closely follows the history of media technology. With each new invention, discussions and fears follow. It goes on to say that with the invention of mass media in the form of newspapers, governments and religious leaders wanted to make sure they were the ones that were in control of what information would be in this media, obviously to maintain a certain amount of control over the populations they governed. This is understandable, right? It's not necessarily done with malicious intent. Think about how governments may want to ensure that their populations are not being exposed to inaccurate information that could harm them and their society. Religious leaders have their own beliefs that they genuinely feel serve the best interests of humanity. So most of the earliest forms of mass media were government owned and operated. But as we now know through seeing history play out, methods of governmental and religious control can and do easily surpass the boundary of serving the population's best interests, instead lending itself to something more disingenuous and sinister, where you have a small elite class that gets to decide what information will reach the masses and what information won't. And they make these decisions on the basis of serving their own interests, not the interests of the masses. Understandably, when the masses catch on to what's happening, they're going to demand change. Before the US was the US, American colonists fought for freedom from British laws prohibiting the use of seditious libel, which was a criminal offense under common law of printing written material with seditious purpose, that is, the purpose of bringing contempt upon a political authority. Basically, they were criminally punished for speaking out against their ruling government. They fought against this and obviously against British control entirely, and eventually became independent. With regards to newspapers and mass media specifically, it was now free from British control and became independently owned and operated under a for-profit model. The newspaper industry was now a business that could be owned by the everyday man, not limited to British imperial control. The early form of this industry in the US was called the penny press, where newspapers were printed in mass and sold for a penny. This revolutionized the world of information and media by making it accessible to the ever-growing middle and working classes. But what also simultaneously happened was the birth of the advertising industry and ultimately sensationalism, the presentation of stories in a way that is intended to provoke public interest or excitement at the expense of accuracy. The first penny press newspaper in the US, The Sun, had this written on every single newspaper they printed. The object of this paper is to lay before the public at a price within the means of everyone all the news of the day, and at the same time offer an advantageous medium for advertisements. They were a trailblazer for a new press model that would bring in revenue from advertisements instead of subscriptions. But they also needed to have a large enough audience so that businesses would be willing to pay them to place ads in their media. So The Sun and other subsequent newspaper companies were able to reach a wide audience by, one, selling the newspapers for incredibly cheap, and two, getting lots of people's attention by publishing sensational stories with bold headlines. The Sun was actually the first newspaper to report on crimes and violence, and also the first to report on things like abuse of state power and corruption schemes. All things that evoke a strong emotional response, which they obviously found to be very effective in garnering attention. However, the more these newspapers realized how much they could make from advertisements, the more sensational the papers became. This gave rise to the concern that publishers were choosing profit over truth. Today, with digital media, we call this clickbait, which is when media outlets or even individual media creators use a headline or tell a story in a way that is specifically designed to invoke a strong emotional response in an effort to get more clicks and thus bring in more advertisement revenue. You will never see clickbait, rage bait, or any other kind of bait on this channel because it goes against my moral code. I think if all media outlets and individual creators resisted the temptation to feed into sensationalism, the world of media and information would be a better place, and here's why. Like I said in the beginning of this video, information literacy globally is on the decline, a very significant decline in the US specifically. This means that collectively we are losing our ability to use information sources to solve problems. There's also a concerningly low level of media literacy awareness and training. Media literacy, as defined by the Oxford English Dictionary, is the ability to critically analyze any story or event presented in the media to determine its accuracy or credibility. Expanding upon that, Wikipedia explains it as the ability to access and analyze media messages, as well as create, reflect, and take action, using the power of information and communication to make a difference in the world. The organization Media Literacy Now conducted a survey where they asked respondents about how much, if any, media literacy training they received in high school. They found that only 4 out of 10 people say they were taught to analyze science news stories for bias and credibility. 62% had no opportunity in high school to reflect on how media affects their beliefs, feelings, or actions. Michelle Amazine, Associate Dean of Research at Boston University, says, Americans are facing difficult issues that require informed decisions, including a contentious presidential election, military action in Ukraine and Gaza, and climate change. But just when we need trusted information more than ever, our media ecosystem is poised for a tsunami of deliberately false content intended to mislead, supercharged by the use of generative artificial intelligence. In case you need proof of how our media ecosystem is a tsunami of deliberately false content, let's take a look at PolitiFact, a fact-checking website. Regarding the issue of immigration, only 7% of the content they checked was deemed true, and only 14% was deemed mostly true. That is abysmal. 9% of the content they checked was deemed pants on fire, which is a rating they give for statements that are not only inaccurate, but they make a ridiculous claim. One of the most notorious ones of 2024, unfortunately, being the claim that Haitian migrants in Springfield are eating people's pets, which regrettably was uttered by the current president during the 2024 presidential debate and since repeated many times across different outlets. It was a blatant lie. Compared to the 7% of content that was found to be true, 32% of the content was deemed to be false, and 18% was deemed mostly false. So of what they analyzed, over 50% of media having to do with immigration was misinformation. But it's already been put out there and is still out there for millions of people to access. Let that sink in. Some of this misinformation includes posts by Musk saying, FEMA sent $59 million to luxury hotels in New York City to house illegal migrants. False. And if you want to check the website yourself, you can click on each claim to read about why it's false and what's false about it and what is actually true. Also important to note that within all of this media misinformation are posts by individual creators who are anti-Musk/Trump. Like this one that said, Donald Trump announced that America will no longer give visas to Nigerians, which was some viral image somewhere, and that is false. For almost all the major issues that PolitiFact fact checks, there is a significantly higher percentage of content found to be false than found to be true. There is a truth shortage, and this is incredibly concerning and dangerous in any political climate, but especially in today's polarized, divisive conditions. We should never be spreading lies, even little white lies, about policies or politicians that we disagree with. That goes for anyone, left, right, and everything in between. Deliberately spreading misinformation is unacceptable and should never be tolerated, yet we do it all the time, mostly without even knowing it. Why? Because we're more divided than ever, and we'll settle for any information that makes our opponents look bad, even at the expense of truth. And that is essentially sensationalism, which, as we know, dates all the way back to the first manifestations of mass media, and its goal is literally to garner large levels of attention solely for the sake of profit and power. Today, we're past the time of reading newspapers, and virtually all the media we consume is digital, through our screens that we never look away from. As I mentioned in the beginning, roughly 5 corporations own all the mass media in the US. Comcast, Warner Bros. Discovery, Disney, Paramount Global, and Fox Corporation, which these names change all the time and mergers and acquisitions are happening, so this information may very well be obsolete a year from now, a month from now, but the idea remains the same, which is that all this ownership is in a few hands. Any major media outlet you can think of likely falls under the umbrella of one of these conglomerates. The reality is that we are living in the illusion of choice every time we consume anything, and we do not have a digital media ecosystem that really allows for the existence of true independent journalism. So what's the result of this? We have become an echo chamber of partisan propaganda. Think MSNBC, that's always pro-Democrat no matter what, or Fox News, that's always pro-Republican no matter what, and they spend a lot of their time just attacking each other. But another issue is that the news we receive has the hands of big business all over it. So understandably, they're going to make sure they protect their own interests in the kind of reporting that they allow to happen under their supervision. Take Comcast, for example, which owns all of these companies, including NBC and MSNBC. Comcast's board of directors includes Edward Breen, who serves as the executive chairman of DuPont, one of the biggest chemical corporations in the US, which I talked about a lot in this video, and Jeffrey Honigman, the CEO of Pepsi-Cola and National Brand Beverages. It's the same with the Walt Disney Company, which owns all of these companies. The chairman of the board is James P. Gorman, who just before he took on this position served as the chairman for Morgan Stanley, the notorious investment banking company. And the chairman before him was Mike G. Parker, who is also the executive chairman for Nike Incorporated. All this to say, mass media and big business go hand in hand together, which means we have to be wary of taking what we see in the news at face value. As this video excellently puts it,
no matter what perspectives these outlets offer, remember that they're all owned by the same ultra-wealthy business interests, and they have their own agenda. The Big Five own all the major news networks, and the messages they put out are designed to reinforce the status quo, peddling minor aesthetic disagreements and diverting attention away from serious societal problems. This is simply the natural conclusion of the hyper-capitalist system we have in the United States. Powerful companies will grow larger and larger, consuming smaller companies that can't compete, acquiring more and more properties until they've reached the very limit of what could be considered legal, thereby dodging antitrust laws and maintaining the maximum amount of power, profit, and cultural significance.
The mass media landscape today is no longer pure journalism, and it hasn't been for a long time. Today, it's not only riddled with biased and divisive coverage of issues, but it's also deeply embedded in the messy web of the corporate capitalist world. Being aware that mass media is a for-profit business helps us engage with it appropriately, constantly asking questions about the validity of their claims and the nuance that they may be intentionally glazing over in order to get their audience to believe something that is not 100% true for the sake of their own benefit. Really, we should be questioning everything we see in the news and on social media, not in a cynical way, but an inquisitive way. We need to be constantly asking ourselves why we believe what we believe and encourage those around us to do the same. Do your own research always, and when you read or watch certain sources, look them up to see who they're owned by and what political leaning they have, if any. This will help you take in that information with the appropriate context. Most importantly, don't consume all your news from just one source, because you will almost always be missing important contextual details. We started this video with the wise words of Noam Chomsky, a leading voice who's been critiquing contemporary capitalism and corporate influence in American society for decades, so we will close out with some more of his wise words. In this clip, he responds to the question, what are some techniques for young people and the population to wake up from the mass media's false reality and false history?
For a lot of young people, people. I think it's, it's called apathy, but I suspect it's more hopelessness, powerlessness. And people can learn you're not powerless. Just take a look at what's been done. Take a look at what other people have done under much harsher conditions than you'll ever face. Power is always in the hands of the governed, those who are being ruled. Power is always in their hands. So how come they just don't overthrow the rulers and take things for themselves? He says, well, the secret, he says, always, every society is control of opinion and attitude.
On that note, it's time to break out of our feeling of collective helplessness in the face of what feels like unmovable structures of power and control. These structures are not set in stone. They can dissolve and evolve, and we are the ones that can make that happen. We are not powerless. We can pressure society to move in a direction that is more harmonious and abundant for all, not just for a few at the top who stepped on others to get there. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear them. Like I said in the beginning, be sure to check out my past video on anti-intellectualism and some of my other past videos, and hit the subscribe button and turn on your post notifications so you can be notified every time I upload in the future. I'll see you guys in the next one.